I was staring at the bright orange notice taped to my front door when I realized the Pinewood Ridge HOA had finally lost their collective minds. The paper flapped in the bitter February wind as I stood there in my driveway, still holding my snow shovel, my breath forming white clouds in the 17-degree air. The fine was for $300. $300 because my snow pile, according to their measurements, exceeded the maximum allowable height of 4 feet as outlined in Section 12.7 of the Community Guidelines. I looked at the mound of snow beside my driveway. Sure, it was tall. We had gotten hammered with back-to-back blizzards in the past 2 weeks here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and I had been diligently clearing my driveway and walkway like a responsible homeowner. Where exactly was I supposed to put the snow? I ripped the notice off my door and stormed inside, tracking snow across the hardwood floors my ex-wife had insisted we install 3 years before she left. The house felt too big now, too empty, but at least it was mine. Or it would be, once I finished paying the mortgage for the next 23 years. I tossed my gloves on the kitchen counter and read the notice again, this time catching the signature at the bottom. Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. Of course it was Brenda. Brenda Whitmore was exactly what you would picture when someone said the words, HOA president. She was 52 years old with a platinum blonde bob that never moved, even in hurricane-force winds. She wore pastel cardigans year-round and had a smile that could curdle milk. She had moved into Pinewood Ridge 5 years ago and immediately ran for the HOA board, winning by default because nobody else wanted the job. Within 6 months, she had rewritten half the community guidelines and started conducting weekly compliance checks of the neighborhood. I had managed to avoid her radar for the most part. I kept my lawn trimmed, my house painted in an approved color, and my garbage cans hidden from street view. But apparently, nature itself had betrayed me. The snow had to go somewhere, and I had piled it in the only logical spot, the strip of land between my driveway and the property line where nothing grew anyway. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office number listed on the notice. It rang 4 times before Brenda's syrupy voice came through the speaker. Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association, this is Brenda speaking. How may I help you maintain our community standards today, Brenda? This is Nathan Cross from 42 Maple Drive. I just found this fine on my door about my snow pile. Oh yes, Nathan. Her voice shifted from sweet to condescending in a heartbeat. I personally conducted the inspection yesterday afternoon. Your snow accumulation measures 4 feet and 7 inches, which is clearly in violation of our height restrictions. Brenda, we just got 2 feet of snow in the past week alone. Where am I supposed to put it? That is not the HOA's concern. The guidelines clearly state that no snow piles may exceed 4 feet in height. Perhaps you should have been more diligent about snow removal throughout the winter season, spreading it more evenly across your property. I looked out my kitchen window at my backyard, which was already buried under 3 feet of snow. My property is covered in snow. There is nowhere else to put it. Again, not our concern. The fine stands. You have 14 days to pay, and the snow pile must be reduced to compliant height within 48 hours, or you will incur an additional fine of $50 per day. This is insane. This is community living, Nathan. We all agreed to these rules when we purchased our homes. Have a wonderful day. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, feeling my blood pressure rising. The woman had actually measured my snow pile with a tape measure, in the middle of winter, in Connecticut, where snow was not just expected but practically guaranteed for 4 months of the year. I grabbed a beer from the fridge even though it was only 2 in the afternoon and sat down at my kitchen table. The notice stared up at me, mocking me with its official letterhead and bureaucratic language. $300. I had just paid for a new water heater the month before. My budget was already stretched thin. That is when the idea hit me. They wanted my snow pile reduced. Fine. I would reduce it, but I had never agreed to where I had to put the snow once I moved it. I spent the rest of the afternoon making preparations. First, I measured the distance from my house to Brenda's house on Oakwood Court. It was approximately half a mile through the winding streets of our subdivision, definitely walkable, even with a loaded snow shovel. Then I checked the HOA guidelines, reading through every single page of the ridiculous document. Nowhere did it specify where snow had to be relocated when removed from a property. It only stated that snow piles on private property could not exceed 4 feet in height. The streets were public property, maintained by the town, and Brenda's front lawn was her private property, not mine. I called my buddy Derek, who lived 2 towns over. He answered on the first ring. "Nathan, what's up? How would you like to help me commit an act of petty revenge against my HOA president? I'm listening." I explained the situation and my plan. Derek started laughing halfway through. "Man, that is beautiful. Yeah, I'm in. When do we start?" "Tonight, after dark. Bring a shovel." "Dude, it is supposed to snow again tonight. Like another 6 inches. Even better." Derek showed up at 8 that evening driving his pickup truck. He had brought his teenage son, Marcus, who was home from his first year at UConn for winter break and apparently bored enough to participate in suburban warfare. Both of them were grinning like idiots when I opened the door. "This is the best thing I have done since moving to the suburbs," Derek said, stamping snow off his boots. "Sarah thinks I am helping you fix your water heater." "Your mom knows you are here, right?" I asked Marcus. "She thinks we are getting pizza and seeing a movie. She is not wrong." "We will do that after." We waited until 10 o'clock when most of the neighborhood had settled in for the night. The snow had started falling again, fat flakes that swirled in the streetlights. Perfect cover. We loaded up our shovels, and I grabbed a sled from my garage that had been sitting unused since my own kids had grown up and moved out. The walk to Brenda's house was cold but exhilarating. We looked like a bizarre parade, 3 men trudging through fresh snow, pulling a sled and carrying shovels. If anyone saw us, they would probably just assume we were helping a neighbor. Which, in a way, we were. We were helping Brenda understand the consequences of ridiculous rules. Her house was a 2-story colonial painted in what the HOA called approved cream with dark green shutters. Every light was off except for a porch light that illuminated her perfectly maintained front steps. Even in winter, she had decorative evergreen arrangements flanking her door. Her driveway was immaculate, not a single snowflake out of place. The woman probably went out every hour to sweep. "Okay," I whispered. "Nice and quiet. Pile it right in the middle of her front lawn." Derek and Marcus got to work while I trudged back to my house for the first load. I filled the sled with as much snow as I could carry and dragged it back. We worked in a rotation. While I went back for more snow, Derek and Marcus would transfer their loads onto Brenda's lawn. The snow was perfect for packing, heavy and wet, and it stuck exactly where we dumped it. After an hour, we had barely made a dent in my pile, but Brenda's lawn was starting to look impressive. A mound of snow roughly 3 feet high was growing in the center of her perfect grass. "This is going to take all night," Marcus said, breathing hard. "Good thing I have beer and pizza money," I replied. We worked until nearly 2 in the morning. My arms ached, my back screamed, and my toes had gone numb even in my insulated boots. But it was worth it. Brenda's front lawn now sported a snow pile that had to be at least 6 feet tall and probably 12 feet wide. It looked like an igloo without the hollow part, a massive monument to petty revenge sitting smack in the middle of her property. We stood at the end of her driveway, admiring our handiwork. Fresh snow covered our tracks, making it look like the pile had simply materialized there. "That is a thing of beauty," Derek said. "I am going to sleep so good tonight," Marcus added. I took a photo with my phone, making sure to capture the full scope of our creation. Then we packed up and headed back to my place, where we devoured an entire large pizza and drank beer until 3 in the morning, recounting the adventure like we had just pulled off a heist. I woke up the next morning to my phone ringing. The caller ID showed the HOA office number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to Brenda's furious message. "Nathan Cross, I know what you did. This is destruction of property and harassment. You will be hearing from my lawyer. You will also be fined for this violation. Call me back immediately." I deleted the message and made myself coffee, feeling better than I had in months. The doorbell rang at noon. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 people standing on my porch. One was Brenda, wearing a cream-colored parka and matching snow boots, her face pinched with fury. The other was a man I recognized as Gerald Thompson, the HOA vice president and Brenda's loyal lapdog. I opened the door but did not invite them in. "Nathan," Brenda said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You dumped all your snow on my lawn." "Did I?" I asked innocently. "Do not play games with me. That snow came from your property." "Can you prove that?" she sputtered. "It is obvious. You were angry about the fine and you retaliated." "That seems like quite an accusation, Brenda. Last I checked, snow was snow. Maybe the wind blew it there." "The wind did not create a 6-foot pile in the middle of my lawn." I shrugged. "Nature is unpredictable. But hey, according to HOA guidelines, snow piles on private property cannot exceed 4 feet. You might want to get that taken care of before you incur a fine." Her face turned an interesting shade of purple. "You think you are clever. You think you can just violate community standards and harass board members without consequences. I have not violated anything. My snow pile is now well below 4 feet. I moved the snow off my property just like you demanded. Where it ended up is not really my concern." Gerald stepped forward. He was a skinny man in his 60s who always wore polo shirts and khakis like he was perpetually ready for a golf game. "Nathan, this is serious. You cannot harass HOA board members." "I did not harass anyone. I cleared snow from my property. If some of it ended up on Brenda's lawn, well, that is just an unfortunate coincidence." "This is not over," Brenda hissed. "You will be paying for snow removal services to clear my property." "I will not be paying for anything. If you want to fine me for having too much snow on my property, fine. But you cannot make me pay to clear snow from your property that you cannot even prove came from mine." They left, Brenda practically vibrating with anger. I watched them drive away and then called my lawyer, a guy named Mike Henderson who had handled my divorce. I explained the situation, and he actually laughed. "Nathan, that is hilarious, but she is right that she could make trouble for you. You have any proof you did not do it?" "No, because I absolutely did do it." "Then maybe do not admit that. Look, she can try to fine you or sue you, but she would have to prove you actually dumped the snow there. Snow does not have fingerprints. Just deny everything and keep your head down." "What about her fine for my original snow pile? Pay it. Pick your battles. $300 is annoying but not worth a legal fight. You made your point." I knew he was right, but it still burned. I was being forced to pay a fine for the crime of being a homeowner during winter in Connecticut. But I paid it online that afternoon, watching $300 drain from my checking account. 2 days later, I received another notice. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 for harassment of HOA board members and destruction of property. It also stated that I was being placed on HOA probation for 6 months, during which any violation, no matter how minor, would result in doubled fines. I called Mike again. "They cannot just make up fines," he said. "Check your HOA bylaws. There has to be a process for this, usually a hearing where you can defend yourself." I dug out the massive binder of HOA documents that had been handed to me at closing 5 years ago. Sure enough, buried in Section 23, there was a procedure for disputes. Any fine over $200 required a hearing before the HOA board, and the homeowner had the right to present evidence and witnesses. I filed a formal dispute and requested a hearing. The HOA had to schedule it within 30 days. In the meantime, the snow kept falling. Connecticut was having one of its worst winters in recent history, and the accumulation was getting ridiculous. Everyone's lawns were buried. The streets were narrow canyons between towering snow banks, and the entire town was running out of places to put it all. The local news ran stories about parking lot mountains and dump trucks hauling snow to the Long Island Sound. Brenda's massive snow pile sat in her front yard like a monument. I drove past her house a few times just to admire it. She had tried to shovel it away, but the thing was so big and densely packed that she had barely made a dent. Eventually, she hired a landscaping company with a small bobcat to haul it away. I watched from down the street as they worked for 3 hours, loading snow into a dump truck. It must have cost her a fortune. The hearing was scheduled for late February in the community center, building near the entrance of our subdivision. I showed up with Mike, a folder full of printed HOA guidelines, and a photo log of every snow pile in the neighborhood that exceeded 4 feet. I had spent an entire Saturday walking around with a tape measure, documenting violations. Out of the 47 houses in Pinewood Ridge, 32 of them had snow piles taller than 4 feet. Only I had been fined. The hearing room was a depressing space with fluorescent lights and folding tables arranged in a rectangle. Brenda sat at the head with Gerald and the other board member, a woman named Patricia Simmons, who mostly just nodded at whatever Brenda said. A few neighbors had showed up to watch, probably hoping for drama. Brenda called the hearing to order with all the self-importance of a Supreme Court justice. "We are here to address the appeal filed by Nathan Cross regarding fines levied for violations of community guidelines. Nathan, you have been fined $500 for harassment and destruction of property. Do you dispute this fine?" "I do," I said, "on multiple grounds." Mike stood up. "For the record, I am Mike Henderson, attorney representing Mr. Cross. We are disputing this fine because there is no evidence that Mr. Cross committed any violation. The HOA has no proof that he moved snow onto Mrs. Whitmore's property." "It is obvious he did it," Brenda snapped. "Who else would have done it?" "Obvious is not evidence," Mike replied calmly. "Do you have video footage, witness statements, any physical evidence linking Mr. Cross to the alleged incident?" Brenda's jaw tightened. "It happened the same night he received his initial fine. The timing makes it clear. Correlation is not causation. Furthermore, the HOA guidelines contain no provision prohibiting the movement of snow from one property to another. Even if Mr. Cross had moved the snow, which we are not admitting, it would not constitute a violation of any existing rule." I pulled out my folder. "I also want to address the original fine. I have documented 32 properties in this neighborhood with snow piles exceeding 4 feet. Why was I the only one fined?" I passed around photos, each one clearly showing a house number and a tape measure next to a snow pile. Brenda's face went from pink to red as she flipped through them. "These were taken last Saturday," I continued. "That is 2 weeks after my fine. The HOA has selectively enforced this rule against me while ignoring identical violations throughout the community. That is discrimination." Patricia spoke up for the first time. "We cannot possibly monitor every property constantly. We address violations as they come to our attention." "How did my violation come to your attention?" I asked. Brenda shifted in her seat. "I was conducting a routine inspection." "Of my property specifically? Or the whole neighborhood?" She did not answer. Mike leaned forward. "The selective enforcement, combined with the retaliatory fine issued after Mr. Cross complained about the initial violation, suggests a pattern of harassment by the HOA against my client. We are prepared to file a lawsuit if this fine is not rescinded." The room went quiet. Lawsuits were expensive, even for an HOA with its reserve funds and insurance. Brenda exchanged glances with Gerald and Patricia. "We will take a short recess to discuss," Brenda said. They disappeared into a side office for 20 minutes. When they returned, Brenda looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "After deliberation, the board has decided to rescind the $500 fine. However, the initial $300 fine stands, as it was legitimate and properly documented. We are also issuing a formal warning that any future violations will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of HOA authority." "And the probationary status?" Mike asked. "Rescinded?" It was not a total victory, but it was good enough. We left the hearing with Brenda glaring daggers at my back. March arrived with a brief warm spell that started melting the mountains of snow. The neighborhood looked like it was recovering from a natural disaster, with brown lawns emerging from white blankets and gutters overflowing with runoff. I thought the whole saga was over. Then the letters started arriving. The first one came in mid-March, a formal notice that the HOA would be conducting a comprehensive property inspection in April. Every single house would be examined for violations of community guidelines, and any issues found would result in immediate fines. The letter emphasized that this was standard annual procedure, but the timing was suspicious. The second letter arrived a week later. My grass, which was just starting to turn green after being buried for months, was allegedly too long. I needed to mow within 7 days or face a $50 fine. Never mind that half the lawn was still dotted with melting snow piles, and the ground was so soggy that a mower would sink into the mud. I mowed anyway, leaving deep ruts in my yard. The third letter cited me for those ruts, claiming they were unsightly and violated the community aesthetic standards. Another $50 fine. I called Mike again. "She is harassing me. This is ridiculous. Document everything. Keep every letter, take photos with timestamps. If she keeps this up, we can file a harassment claim." The fines kept coming. My mailbox was slightly crooked after a snowplow had clipped it in February. $50. My house number was faded and difficult to read from the street. $75. I had left my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. $100. By May, I had racked up over $800 in fines for violations that ranged from petty to outright fabricated. I was not the only one. Other neighbors started complaining at the monthly HOA meetings. Brenda had declared war on the entire neighborhood, conducting inspections with a fervor that bordered on obsessive. She walked around with a clipboard and a camera, documenting every minor imperfection. That is when I discovered something interesting. I was at the town clerk's office filing a complaint about street repairs when I ran into Janet Morrison, a woman who worked in the building department. She lived in a different subdivision but knew about Pinewood Ridge. "You guys have that crazy HOA president, right?" she said. "Brenda something. Whitmore. Yeah, she is making our lives miserable. You should look into her property. I remember processing some permits for her last year. I think she might have done work without approval." That was interesting. HOA board members were supposed to follow the same rules as everyone else. If Brenda had work done on her house without HOA approval, that would be a violation of the very guidelines she was so obsessed with enforcing. I went home and dug through the HOA meeting minutes from the past 2 years, which were technically public record for homeowners. There was no record of Brenda requesting approval for any modifications to her property. But I had definitely noticed changes. Her front porch had been expanded at some point, and I was pretty sure she had replaced her windows. I filed a Freedom of Information request with the town for all building permits issued for Brenda's address in the past 3 years. It cost me $20 and took 2 weeks, but when the documents arrived, I hit gold. Brenda had pulled permits for a porch expansion, window replacement, and a deck addition to her backyard. All of this work required HOA approval according to our guidelines. Any exterior modification had to be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval before construction could begin. She had never submitted any requests. I made copies of everything and sent them to every member of the HOA board, along with a formal complaint citing Brenda for multiple violations of the architectural guidelines. Each violation carried a minimum fine of $500, and repeat violations could result in legal action to compel compliance. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had gotten around that Brenda was being accused of violations, and half the neighborhood showed up to watch the drama. I arrived early and took a seat in the front row. Brenda tried to start the meeting with the usual boring agenda items, but Gerald interrupted her. "We need to address the complaint filed against you, Brenda." "That complaint is frivolous and will be dismissed," she said, not looking up from her notes. "It is not frivolous. I reviewed the documents. You did work on your property without HOA approval. That is a clear violation." Patricia nodded. "I saw the permits too." "Why did you not submit the requests to the Architectural Committee?" Brenda's composure finally cracked. "Those were minor repairs and maintenance. They did not require approval." I stood up. According to Section 8.3 of the guidelines, any exterior modification, regardless of scope, requires written approval. You replaced 15 windows, expanded your front porch by 40 square feet, and built a 300-square-foot deck. That is not minor maintenance. "You are twisting the rules," she shot back. "I am reading them exactly as they are written, the same way you have been reading them when you fine everyone else." The room erupted in conversation. Other homeowners started shouting questions and complaints. Someone brought up the ridiculous snow pile fines from winter. Someone else mentioned being cited for a crooked mailbox. The meeting devolved into chaos. Gerald finally restored order by banging a gavel that I did not even know the HOA owned. "We need to take this seriously," he said. "If board members are not following the guidelines, how can we expect homeowners to follow them? I am calling for a vote on whether to fine Brenda for these violations." "You cannot do that," Brenda protested. "I am the president." "Which means you should be held to an even higher standard," Patricia said quietly. The vote was 3-0 in favor of fining Brenda $1,500, $500 for each violation. Brenda sat there in stunned silence, her face pale, but I was not done. I raised my hand. "I have another issue to bring up. I have documented over 40 frivolous fines issued in the past 3 months, most of them targeted at homeowners who have complained about HOA enforcement. This constitutes harassment and abuse of authority." I am requesting that the board review all fines issued since January and refund any that were improperly assessed. Another homeowner stood up. I want to file a formal complaint against Brenda for harassment. She has been targeting me ever since I spoke against her at the last meeting. Then another person stood, and another. Within minutes, a dozen homeowners were on their feet, all complaining about Brenda's enforcement tactics. The meeting turned into an impromptu grievance session that lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, Gerald and Patricia looked exhausted. They agreed to conduct a full review of all fines issued since January and to place Brenda on temporary leave from her HOA duties pending an investigation into her conduct. Brenda stormed out of the meeting without saying a word. I thought that would be the end of it. I had won, more or less. Brenda had been exposed and punished, and the rest of the neighborhood was finally standing up against her tyranny. But 2 weeks later, things took a darker turn. I came home from work one evening in early June to find my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had taken a baseball bat to it, leaving it dented and hanging at an angle. My first instinct was that it was just kids being stupid, but then I saw what was spray painted on my garage door. Snitch in bright red letters, 3 feet tall, impossible to miss. I called the police. They sent an officer who took photos and filed a report, but he was honest about the chances of catching whoever did it. Probably kids, he said. We will increase patrols in the area, but without witnesses or video, there is not much we can do. I did not think it was kids. The timing was too convenient, but I could not prove anything. The vandalism continued. A week later, my tires were slashed, all 4 of them, which cost me $800 to replace. Then someone threw eggs at my house in the middle of the night. Then my trash cans were tipped over and garbage was spread across my lawn. I installed security cameras front and back. If someone came onto my property again, I would have evidence. It took 3 nights, but the cameras finally caught something. At 2 in the morning, a figure dressed in dark clothes and a ski mask crept into my driveway. They were carrying a can of spray paint, heading toward my garage. I watched on my phone from my bedroom, my heart pounding. Then I grabbed my phone and called the police while turning on every exterior light I had. The figure froze, then ran. But the cameras got clear footage of them fleeing toward a car parked down the street. The license plate was visible in one frame. The police ran the plate. It belonged to Gerald Thompson, the HOA vice president. They brought him in for questioning, and he folded immediately. He admitted to all the vandalism, claiming he was doing it to protect Brenda's reputation. She had convinced him that I was trying to destroy the HOA and that I needed to be scared off. He had not meant any real harm, he said. He just wanted to make me uncomfortable enough to back off. Gerald was charged with criminal mischief and harassment. Because it was a first offense and he was cooperative, he got a plea deal, 1 year of probation, community service, and restitution for all the damages. But the investigation did not stop there. When the police searched his phone, they found text messages between him and Brenda. Messages where she explicitly encouraged him to handle the Nathan problem and suggested specific acts of vandalism. In one message, she wrote, "Make sure he knows this will not stop until he leaves the neighborhood." That crossed the line from HOA petness into criminal conspiracy. Brenda was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my living room window as a police cruiser pulled up to her house, and 2 officers walked to her door. She came out in handcuffs, still wearing her signature pastel cardigan, her face a mask of shock and fury. She was charged with conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and harassment. Unlike Gerald, she refused to take a plea deal. She maintained her innocence, claiming she had no knowledge of what Gerald was doing and that the text messages were taken out of context. The case went to trial in September. I had to testify, describing the months of harassment and the escalating retaliation after I challenged her authority. Other homeowners testified too, painting a picture of a woman obsessed with control who could not handle being questioned. The jury found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to me and several other homeowners. She was also permanently barred from serving on the HOA board or any similar community organization. The Pinewood Ridge HOA held emergency elections to replace Brenda and Gerald. Patricia stayed on as acting president temporarily, and 2 new board members were elected who actually seemed interested in serving the community rather than wielding power. One of the first things they did was rewrite the guidelines, eliminating the most ridiculous rules, like the 4-foot snow pile restriction. They also implemented a new appeals process with third-party arbitration for disputes, preventing any single board member from wielding unchecked authority. By the time winter rolled around again, Pinewood Ridge felt like a different place. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out. The constant threat of fines and violations was gone, replaced by an HOA that actually functioned as it was supposed to, handling maintenance and community projects without micromanaging everyone's lives. I was shoveling my driveway after the first real snowfall of the season, working up a good sweat despite the cold, when my neighbor from across the street, Tom Williams, walked over with his own shovel. "Need a hand?" he asked. "Sure, thanks." We worked together in comfortable silence for a while, clearing snow and piling it wherever it fit. My pile was definitely over 4 feet tall, but nobody cared. That was the way it should be. "Hell of a year," Tom finally said, leaning on his shovel. "Yeah, it was." "You did good standing up to her. Someone needed to," I shrugged. "I just got tired of the nonsense." "Well, we all appreciate it. This place is actually nice to live in now." We finished the driveway, and Tom headed back to his own house. I stood there for a moment, looking at my snow pile, then at the quiet street lined with houses where people could just live their lives without fear of arbitrary fines and petty tyrants. Brenda had wanted to control everything, to enforce order through fear and punishment. Instead, she had ended up losing everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom. All because she could not let go of power, even when it was destroying her. I went inside and made hot chocolate, sitting at my kitchen table and looking out at my snow-covered yard. The house did not feel too big anymore. It felt like home, like a place where I belonged, without anyone dictating how I had to live. The orange fine notice was still tucked in a drawer somewhere, a reminder of how a simple dispute about snow had spiraled into months of harassment, vandalism, and criminal charges. But it was over now. Brenda was in jail, Gerald was on probation, and the HOA was finally functioning the way it was supposed to. I pulled out my phone and texted Derek. "Snow is back. Want to help me build a snowman?" he replied immediately. "Only if we build it in Brenda's old yard." I laughed, but I did not take him up on it. I had no interest in revenge anymore. Justice had been served, both legal and karmic. Brenda had fined me for snow piled too high, and I had dumped it on her front lawn. That one act of petty rebellion had exposed a corrupt, power-hungry HOA president, and led to real change in our community. Sometimes standing up to bullies is not about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it is just about refusing to back down, documenting everything, and letting the system work the way it is supposed to. And sometimes it is about moving a few tons of snow in the middle of the night with your best friend and his son, just to make a point. I finished my hot chocolate and went back outside to admire my handiwork. The driveway was clear, the walkway was safe, and my snow pile reached toward the sky, tall and proud and completely legal. The winter sun was starting to set, casting orange and pink light across the white landscape. Somewhere across town, Brenda was sitting in a jail cell, probably still convinced she had done nothing wrong, still believing she was the victim in all this. But out here, in the real world, life went on. People shoveled their driveways and piled their snow wherever it fit. They painted their houses and planted their gardens and lived their lives without someone measuring and photographing and fining every minor deviation from arbitrary rules. The HOA still existed. We still had guidelines and monthly meetings and community standards. But now, they served their actual purpose, maintaining property values and coordinating shared expenses, not feeding someone's power trip. I grabbed my shovel and cleared the last bit of snow from my front steps, adding it to my magnificent pile. Then I went inside, tracked snow across my floors one more time, and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow I would wake up, go to work, come home, and live my life. No fines waiting on my door, no threatening letters in the mail, no vandalism in the night. Just a normal life in a normal neighborhood, exactly as it should be. The story of Brenda Whitmore and her reign of HOA terror became neighborhood legend, the kind of thing people told new residents as a cautionary tale. The snow pile incident was the favorite part. The moment when one fed-up homeowner decided he had had enough and quite literally moved a mountain to make his point. I never regretted it, not for a second. Every shovelful of snow I had dumped on her lawn had been worth it, not because of the revenge itself, but because it had started a chain of events that freed an entire community from a tyrant. Sometimes you have to fight petty tyranny with petty rebellion. Sometimes you have to show people that rules without reason are just tools of oppression. And sometimes you just have to move a whole lot of snow in the middle of the night. As I sat there in my warm house, I raised my mug of hot chocolate in a silent toast. To winter, to snow piles, to standing up for yourself, and to the beautiful petty justice of suburban warfare. Brenda had tried to find me into submission, and instead she had ended up in jail. The irony was not lost on me. The following months were peaceful in a way I had not experienced since moving to Pinewood Ridge. The new HOA board was actually competent and reasonable. They sent out newsletters about upcoming community events instead of violation notices. They organized a neighborhood cleanup day in the spring where everyone worked together to repair the damage from the harsh winter. They even threw a summer block party with grills and music and kids running around. I found myself actually enjoying living in an HOA community. Who would have thought? Patricia stepped down as president after 6 months, saying she had only agreed to stay on temporarily to help with the transition. The new president was a guy named Robert Chen, a software engineer who worked from home and had always been frustrated with Brenda's enforcement tactics. His first official act was to create an online portal where homeowners could submit requests, pay dues, and communicate with the board without having to deal with condescending phone calls or formal letters. The second thing he did was organize a committee to review all the old fines that had been issued under Brenda's administration. They ended up refunding over $30,000 to homeowners who had been unfairly cited for minor or fabricated violations. I got back $500, which more than covered the original snow pile fine. Life returned to normal, or what passed for normal in suburban Connecticut. I dated occasionally, spent weekends with my kids when they came to visit, worked on home improvement projects without fear of HOA retaliation. My lawn was sometimes a bit too long, My mailbox stayed slightly crooked. My trash cans were occasionally visible from the street for more than 12 hours. Nobody cared. That was the thing Brenda had never understood. Most people just want to live their lives without constant oversight and criticism. They want a clean, safe neighborhood without turning it into a police state. They want rules that make sense and protect property values without stripping away personal freedom. Brenda had seen the HOA presidency as a throne, a position of power that gave her authority over her subjects. But that is not what an HOA is supposed to be. It is supposed to be a collective, neighbors working together to maintain their community. The moment it becomes about control and punishment, it stops serving its purpose. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned to stand up for myself, to document everything, to not back down when facing unjust authority. I learned that most people are on your side if you are fighting for something reasonable. And I learned that sometimes the simplest acts of rebellion can spark real change. The snow pile incident became my defining moment in Pinewood Ridge. People still brought it up at neighborhood gatherings, usually with a laugh and a shake of the head. Remember when Nathan dumped all that snow on Brenda's lawn? It was a story that got better with each retelling, growing more elaborate and dramatic, but the core truth remained the same. One man, fed up with ridiculous rules, took matters into his own hands, or his own shovel, technically. Derek still liked to remind me that he had been there, that it was a team effort. "You could not have done it without me and Marcus," he would say, grinning, and he was right. It had been more fun doing it together, sharing the absurdity and the adrenaline and the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Marcus was back at UConn, studying business management. He said the snow pile story had inspired him to take a class on organizational behavior and leadership. What not to do, basically, he told me. Use you and Brenda as case studies in my papers. I gave him permission, hoping some future business leader might learn something from our suburban saga. As for Brenda, she served her 6 months and got out on good behavior. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Florida, to a retirement community without an HOA. The irony was delicious. After spending years enforcing every minor rule, she had chosen to live somewhere without any restrictions at all. Maybe she had learned something. Or maybe she just could not handle the humiliation of living in Pinewood Ridge after everything that happened. Either way, she was gone, and we were better off for it. I still think about that first find sometimes, that bright orange notice flapping on my door in the February wind. $300 for snow piled too high, as if I had control over winter itself. It had seemed so unfair, so petty, so perfectly emblematic of everything wrong with HOA overreach, and in a way that fine had been a gift. It had forced me to take action, to stand up and fight back. It had exposed corruption and abuse of power. It had brought the community together against a common enemy. It had led to real, positive change, all because of snow. Connecticut winters are harsh, but they are also beautiful. The way fresh snow blankets everything in white, muffling sound and softening edges. The way ice catches the light and sparkles. The way neighborhoods come together to dig out after a storm, strangers helping strangers, everyone united against nature's inconvenience. Brenda had tried to fight nature, to control it with rules and measurements and fines. But nature does not care about your guidelines. Snow falls where it falls. It piles up where it piles up. And sometimes, late at night, it mysteriously moves from one lawn to another, carried by determined men with shovels and a sense of righteous petness. I never did ask Tom or any of the other neighbors if they had seen us that night. Some things are better left unspoken, understood but not discussed. Everyone knew what I had done, but nobody had proof, and nobody cared to pursue it. They were too busy being relieved that someone had finally stood up to Brenda. That winter, a year after the original incident, Connecticut got hit with another series of blizzards. Snow piled up everywhere, higher than the previous year. My driveway once again became a challenge, and my snow pile once again exceeded 4 feet. Robert sent out an email to the whole neighborhood. Due to the exceptional snowfall this season, the HOA is temporarily suspending the snow pile height restriction. Please clear your driveways and walkways as needed for safety. Pile the snow wherever you can fit it. We will all get through this together. I printed that email and taped it to my refrigerator. That was leadership. That was common sense. That was an HOA functioning the way it should. I cleared my driveway and piled the snow high, creating a mountain that would have given Brenda an aneurysm. Then I helped Tom clear his driveway, and we helped the elderly couple next door clear theirs. Up and down the street, neighbors were helping neighbors, sharing snowblowers and shovels and flasks of Irish coffee. This was community. Not rules and fines and constant surveillance, but people taking care of each other, working together, making life a little easier for everyone. As I stood there in the cold, my breath steaming, my arms aching, my snow pile towering beside me, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Pride. Satisfaction. Belonging. This was my neighborhood, my home, and it was finally a place worth living. Brenda had tried to find me for snow piled too high, so I dumped every shovelful on her front lawn. That single act of defiance had changed everything. It had toppled a tyrant, reformed a corrupt system, and given a community back to its people. And all it took was a lot of snow, a couple of good friends, and the willingness to stand up and say enough is enough. Sometimes the smallest acts of rebellion create the biggest waves. Sometimes fighting back against petty tyranny is exactly what a community needs. And sometimes justice comes not from lawyers and courts, but from snow shovels in the middle of the night. I went inside, made myself another hot chocolate, and looked out at my magnificent snow pile. It was at least 6 feet tall, maybe 7, a towering monument to freedom from arbitrary rules. And nobody, absolutely nobody, was going to find me for it.